Hi, everybody. I feel like I'm kind of interrupting what you're doing, but I promise to be as fascinating as possible, and I won't take up too much of your time. Anyway, I'm very happy to be here. Very grateful to Soul Food Books for hosting me this afternoon. And as Aaron said, I have written a book, and I'm very excited about it. It was published in June of this year, and this is a long-time dream come true for me. And it's called Along the Wheel of Time, Sacred Stories for Nature Lovers. And I am, well, maybe I should tell you a little bit about myself first. I am the founding priestess of Gaia's Temple, which is an inclusive ministry that fosters love of the divine feminine by honoring nature and fostering the qualities of compassion and relatedness. And my ministry is in Seattle, Washington. This past September, we are 14 years old, so we have over a decade of service to the community. And it is a house of worship for the divine feminine, but it is an inclusive house of worship. So what that means is that we worship and honor the principle of the divine feminine as well as the divine masculine, not just the divine masculine, which is what you'll find in most of your houses of worship. So we've got a beautiful, thriving community, a great congregation. And we meet once a month on the second Sunday of every month. In fact, our service was this morning. And the service that I offered this morning was entitled Passageway to Light. And it was all about the solstice, the winter solstice, which is coming up. So my ministry is pagan in origin. And whenever I use that word, I like to be real clear that pagan means of the earth or earth-based. And so we follow a form of earth-based spirituality, which means that the solstices, the equinoxes, and the cross-quarter days in between are the 8 natural earth holy days. We call them Sabbats, and they are on what pagans call the Wheel of the Year. So when I wrote this book, Along the Wheel of Time, I wrote 8 short stories to accompany those points on the Wheel of the Year. And they are the solstices and the equinoxes and the cross-quarter days in between. So this book is written in the genre of magical realism, and what that means is that the stories depict everyday people like you and me living their magical spiritual lives according to what's going on in nature. And it is quite magical. There's a lot of magical stuff that goes on in here. I didn't want to write another how-to book about spirituality or paganism in particular. There's so many of them out there. So I just decided that I would write a collection of short stories so that people could learn in a way, but really just have some beautiful stories. So there's a couple of ways you can use the book. One is to read it straight through. The other is to wait until where you are on the point of the wheel or in the seasons and then read that story specifically to bring you a little bit closer and deepen your spiritual connection to nature. So what I thought I would do today would be to read an excerpt from the Yule story, because Yule is coming up next Sunday, December 21st. The actual point of the solstice will be at like 3:03 in the afternoon when the sun goes into Capricorn. That's the actual moment of the solstice. The solstice, the word solstice means sun stop. And that's in Latin, of course, and it was called that because it seemed as if the sun really had stopped. It's the longest night of the solar year, the shortest day. So when the sun didn't really rise until almost 7 o'clock in the morning and it was already setting by 4 o'clock, to the ancients who didn't have all the wisdom that we do and all the technology to understand their world, just thought the sun was really disappearing. And so when the sun returns and as the days grow lighter minute by minute, from the solstice straight through to the summer solstice, when it's actually the longest day of the solar year. In the theology, if you can use that word for paganism, we say that the great cosmic mother labors through that longest night to bring the sun back to glorious birth. And so it is this birthing process of the return of the sun and the return of the light that we celebrate at the time of the winter solstice. We can see how some of the more modern religions that came afterward kind of lifted and worked with that concept that the ancients had been following for thousands of years in their mother who gives birth to the light of the world. On Christmas, they just kind of moved it a couple of days out and kind of, in a way, co-opted that story because all things new arise from what existed beforehand. And so when Christianity was rising to power, they just kind of took that story and said, well, if we kind of change it a little bit here or there, the people will still believe that they're worshiping in the same way. And this is kind of part of how that transition from paganism to Christianity took place several thousand years ago. But anyway, here we are in modern times, and we are still experiencing the longest night and the shortest day, and that exactly will be happening on next Sunday, the 21st. And so what I'd like to do today is read an excerpt from my book on the Yule story, and I'll give you a little bit of explanation about it. Actually, I wonder if maybe I should just read the intro to it. Yes, I'll just read the intro to it because that explains it. And why reinvent the wheel if I've already written it? So at Yule, the winter solstice, it's said that the great cosmic mother gives birth to the sun, the light of the world. At midwinter, the days begin to grow longer. Pagans keep this Sabbath holy by holding vigil through the longest night of the wheel, keeping candles and fires lit to welcome the return of the light. In this story, the magic of the Sabbath ritual is interwoven with one woman's experience of giving birth to her firstborn. She's chosen a home birth, assisted by her husband, a midwife, and a doula. Their desire to support, love, and greet his child brings her husband to the birth. The midwife is there to facilitate the birthing process and catch the baby, and the doula is there for the mother, providing for her needs as the birth progresses. So what I've done in this story is I go back and forth, juxtaposing the actual birth that's taking place and then a group of people who are, in the mythical across town somewhere, doing their solstice ritual at night. And so I go back and forth. I'm not going to read the whole story, but I do want to read you the bits and pieces about the actual progression of the birth and how that connects spiritually and magically for the woman who is pregnant and who's now giving birth. So it goes like this. When the depth of winter was upon them and the earth lay dormant, when the land was covered in snow and the cold crept indoors, held at bay by warm blankets, cups of hot tea, and wood stoves, an earthquake began in the small of Sophia's back. She'd tossed and turned all the night before, feeling restless, unable to find a comfortable way to put her body. The blankets were too warm, her pregnant belly too heavy, and its pulling and tugging kept her awake for most of the night. And now, late morning, this spasm in her sacrum told her that her baby was on its way, and as she had done a million times before, she imagined her birth canal to be smooth and wide, open and relaxed, but it didn't seem to ease the tension in her body. She called to Brian. "It's begun. Our child is coming." "Are you okay?" he asked, running in from the other room. "I think so," she said, "but it's intense. Should we call the midwife or wait?" "What are you feeling?" he asked, as he had been instructed to do. "My lower back is spasming and it goes down the sides of my belly." "Is it constant?" "No, but even when the spasm eases, my belly doesn't relax." "Well, let's wait until the next one and see if it's stronger, okay?" He put his hands on her swollen, tight belly. "You're beautiful," he said. In the respite between quakes, Sophia found comfort in thinking of the journey of her pregnancy. She remembered how early last spring she stepped outside in the melting snow and caught sight of the first rich purple crocus with its jaunty orange center. She had smiled softly at the idea that the heat she and Brian had created together in their lovemaking the night before had provided the warmth for a flowering. 6 weeks later, as she wove the ribbon around the maypole, she knew it for certain when she felt the quickening in her womb. Life had blossomed there, and its presence elated her. Her belly grew with the summer, and by early autumn it was as round as the moon and just as luminous. She marveled at the changes in her body, the dark brown vertical line down her huge belly, how her faster-growing nails were stronger, how her skin seemed to glow. But mostly she marveled at her breasts. Always rather modest, they now swelled to a great size, heavy and sensitive. Getting ready to nurse, her mother told her. It was odd but wonderful to feel her baby kick from the inside. She imagined over and over what her baby was trying to tell her with those kicks, what her baby would look like, who her baby would be. By mid-December, she felt that her body was no longer her own. She wanted to give herself over to being nothing more than a host for this life inside her, a resource of blood and fuel, food and lineage that existed only to grow and provide for this child. She'd heard other mothers, pregnant mothers, speak about how difficult the last few weeks of their pregnancy were, how they wished to reclaim their bodies for themselves, how they longed to be over and done with carrying. But Sophia loved the feeling of her body inside, changing so drastically how she went about her days. The next quake took hold. It's hard to pinpoint, she told Brian. I feel it everywhere. My belly cramps from the inside and it tightens on the outside. Her contractions went on like this for the better part of the day. Sophia kept walking around and around inside the house to keep herself busy, humming to calm herself and to show Brian she was doing just fine. By late afternoon, each quake intensified and came a bit faster on the heels of the one before. They agreed that this was the sign to call for help. So that's how the whole thing begins. Across town, Ruby Moon Coven meets inside the temple sanctuary, arriving before the rest of their community. They greet one another with warm embraces, anticipating another experience of soulful magic together. Tonight is the celebration of the Yule Sabbath, and preparing the central altar is ritual in itself. Everyone takes hold of an edge of a large red round cloth, helps to lay it on the floor in the middle of the room, and places cuttings around it, fragrant cedar for protection and evergreen holly for the return of life. The cardinal directions hold the 4 elements: a crystal for earth, an athame for air, a candle for fire, and a chalice for water. In the center, a freshly crafted evergreen wreath represents spirit, the hub of the wheel, where all things connect. A basket of candles waits in the southern quarter of the circle. As they complete these preparations, others start arriving, wearing warm and soft clothing for the long night's vigil till dawn. They carry food and drink to share, to sustain them through the night. Before long, the flurry of greetings gives way to a focus on the reason for the gathering, and everyone gathers around the altar in the center, and the ritual begins. Jill the midwife and Maggie the doula arrived within minutes of each other, half an hour after twilight. Jill, a clear, tall, warm woman of middle years, had short salt and pepper hair, experience in her eyes and certainty in her presence, and a comforting tone in her voice. Maggie wore soothing greens and browns, her silver threaded plaits hanging down her chest. She seemed to Sophia to be psychic, knowing everything there was to know about exactly what you were feeling and when. When they had interviewed Jill, it had been clear to Sophia that Jill respected Sophia and Brian's spiritual path. Maggie already followed a magical path, and the 2 women were the perfect people to assist in the birth of their child. Jill checked Sophia's progress. Her capable hands prodded a bit, but were not invasive. Sophia found her touch reassuring, and after the initial examination, Jill said, "Great, it's all going perfectly. Nothing more to do but wait." Jill and Maggie watched Brian pace as he asked questions they had already answered for him. They shared a glance, and then Jill spoke up. "Brian, this would be a good time for you to start boiling water and warming the towels. And if you could brew a pot of strong coffee and prepare any other food you think we'll need as we wait, that would be great." She smiled as Brian's face registered relief at the request. He fairly leaped to accomplish these tasks. Brian was a wonderful man, a devoted husband, and eager to become a father. But Sophia knew that idleness felt unnatural to him, especially under stress. So she smiled back at Jill, grateful he'd been given things to do. The burning wheel of the pale sun had long since set as the bed was prepared for the birth. The bedroom was fast becoming sacred space. Maggie lit a smudge stick of sage and quickly blew the rising smoke in the 4 directions, north, east, south, and west, before snuffing it out. Then she lit a candle scented with frankincense and myrrh and placed it in the center of the bedroom altar. They all settled in for the long winter's night. Humming softly, Maggie propped more pillows behind Sophia, and with gentle hands she removed the barrette holding Sophia's hair and drew the brush against her scalp, sweeping Sophia's hair into a real neat shine without a single knot or tangle. "This will make the birth easier," she said, her eyes twinkling. Sophia sighed contentedly, and Maggie could feel her relax. So that's how that begins. And now I'm just going to jump forward a little bit. As the night progresses, the coven across town creates their sacred space and delves a little deeper into their ritual. And then Maggie pulled up a chair beside Sophia's bed. She reached into her tote bag once more, and this time she took out her spindle and a large clump of raw wool. After she attached a piece of the wool to the spindle, her arm rose and the spindle dropped and began to spin. She loved this tool. The spinning would help Sophia's brain waves to focus. Maggie started humming an easy tune. Sophia watched, transfixed, as the spindle spun around and around, as something new formed from the mass of fiber, a thin, smooth strand of wool that wrapped around the spindle in neat and evenly spaced rows. Maggie added on another piece as her arm rose again and the spindle dropped again in a slow and steady rhythm, creating a relaxed atmosphere of predictability. Sophia's breathing slowed and steadied, and her pulse calmed. Later, another contraction and a loud gasp. "Are you okay?" Brian asked, his eyes wide in his anxious face. Jill placed her hand on his shoulder. "Brian, why don't you pull over that chair and stay closer to Sophia? She's doing great. No need to ask that question again." Then he remembered. He wasn't supposed to ask a stupid question like, "Are you okay?" If anything, he could ask specifics. "Can I hold your hand? May I put another pillow behind you? Do you want a sip?" "Are you okay?" was really a question he was asking to reassure himself. Brian wasn't sure he wanted to pull up a chair and stay closer. That was the plan they had agreed on, but now that capable Jill and magical Maggie seemed to have it all under control, he wondered if he might lose his cool as the labor progressed. He worried that he might be in the way instead of helpful, and that he might faint at the sight of the blood he knew was surely coming. But he drew up his chair anyway, sat down and put his hand on Sophia's shoulder. He wanted her to know that he would not abandon her. "I'm here," was all he said. And the contraction eased, Sophia breathed a deep sigh, and Jill nodded. So the night goes on, the labor continues, the coven across town continue to do their magic on the solstice night. And then deeper into the night we come to here. Brian dozed in his chair. Maggie walked Sophia around and around the room and then sat her back down to massage the pressure points on her legs that would trigger the release of the infant from her womb. Jill sipped her cup of coffee, and the night wore on. The journey from 7 centimeters dilated to the birth of her child took patience, endurance, courage, and the rest of the night. Sophia knew that at some point she would have to surrender herself to the great waves of pain and movement that she could not control. As if on cue, her body grew active once more, this time with a vengeance. She gripped the bed sheets as her breath caught. Brian awoke and shook the sleep from his head. "I'm here, beautiful," he said. The contractions were coming faster now. Sophia could feel her muscles push her baby lower and lower, and she knew she was on the brink of the visceral and magical miracle of birth. She was acutely conscious of her blood and sweat and breath, all of it real and unashamed and unwaveringly present. Time was suspended. Exhaustion carried sway, and she was amazed by the natural wisdom of her own body. Tears streamed from Brian's eyes. He was awed by witnessing the greatest feat a woman can perform, the giving of life. He gently blotted the sweat from Sophia's forehead. Jill said, "On the next contraction, push." "Oh, my goddess," Sophia cried out, her staggered breath coming through gritted teeth as the contraction took her. Maggie, her arm around Sophia's back, encouraged her. "Lean into the pain and use it." "Use the pain?" Sophia thought wildly. "How do I do that?" And as if she had asked the question out loud, Maggie answered, "Push into it. Don't brace yourself against it. Push into it." And then everything clicked. Sophia's body understood what her mind could not imagine. The next wave roiled from within. She took a deep breath and bore down into the blinding pain. Jill announced, "You're crowning." So I'm going to leave you there, because I'm not going to end the whole story. But anyway, that's my story from Yule and Along the Wheel of Time, Sacred Stories for Nature Lovers. For anyone who's been listening, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and your focus. And if you are interested, my books are over there for purchase. I'll be happy to sign them for you. Thanks so much.